My name is Marcy, and on behalf of Harvard Bookstore, I'd like to thank you all for joining us for tonight's event with Scott McCloud and Hilary L. Chute. This discussion is being recorded for the Forum Network, a joint venture of WGBH and the Lowell Institute, and may be available online on the Forum Network at forum-network.org and harvard.com. Please note that during Q&A, your questions may be recorded. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers for this evening. Scott McCloud is the award-winning author of Understanding Comics, Reinventing Comics, and Making Comics. He is regarded as one of the premier internationally recognized authorities on comics and visual communication. I wouldn't lie about that. Scott is joined this evening by Hilary L. Chute, Associate Professor of English at the University of Chicago. Hilary is the author of Graphic Women, Life, Narrative, and Contemporary Comics, as well as Outside the Box, Interviews with Contemporary Cartoonists. We also have copies of Outside the Box available for purchase at the book table tonight. And tonight they will be discussing Scott's latest graphic novel, The Sculptor. Publishers Weekly describes The Sculptor as a fractious love story with operatic swoons of despair that play out against the harsh reality of a cutthroat art market and deftly handled flights of fantasy. McCloud doesn't just define a genre, he exemplifies it. And we are so thrilled to be hosting two such acclaimed authors here at the Brattle Theater this evening. Please join me in welcoming Scott McCloud and Hilary L. Chute.
So thank you everyone for coming. I have to say it's a great honor for me to be doing an event at the Brattle. And I also want to note that the character Meg from Scott's book, The Sculptor, did work at a revival movie theater, so it seems somewhat fitting to have this event here. And as it turns out, Scott and I are both from Massachusetts. So I wanted to start by asking Scott, before we get into The Sculptor, a question that I just can't resist, which is, would you tell me about your comic, The Battle of Lexington?
Yes. When I was in high school, my friend Kurt Busick and I, Kurt also makes comics now, but in middle school he got me into comics. Diamond Junior High School in Lexington, Massachusetts is where we met, in the cafeteria. And we worked on this comic together for 3 years. Actually, it even extended into college. It was 64 pages long. It was called The Battle of Lexington, and it was about a whole bunch of Marvel superheroes beating the crap out of each other and destroying all of Lexington, Massachusetts, and most specifically our high school. It was lovingly rendered and very, very carefully toned in like hyper-obsessive pencil. Just pencil on bond paper, and yeah, it was the first comic we ever did until Pow Biff Pops, which was about Marvel and DC superheroes getting together and beating the crap out of each other in Boston, which was, strangely enough, sold for charity at Boston Symphony Hall, where 4 murals that I designed when I was 16 years old, and Saul Harrison was at our table, and my life is extremely weird. But yeah, it was a real thing.
Now, does it still exist somewhere?
The Battle of Lexington does, in fact, exist. Kurt and I, for a while, would trade every year. He would send me the copy, or I'd send him. So we would take turns having the original. I don't even know who has it now. We sent 1 page off to the Comics Journal for an article they published about us, and they never sent it back, so we're missing a page. Nobody knows where it is.
So can you walk me forward a little bit and tell me how you got involved in making comics that did get published and circulated?
Well, my first job in comics was actually in DC Comics production department. I took a design course in Syracuse University, and one of the things they taught us was how to do a proper resume. So I did one, and part of the assignment was send it to somebody. So I did. I sent it to DC Comics in New York, publishers of Superman and Batman, and I said, hey, I noticed you're expanding the universe. I'll bet you want some production people. Hey, here I am. And they wrote back saying, sure, come on down. Interview with us. So I was, what? And then I just got on a bus from Syracuse University, and I went down and I got the job. It was great. I negotiated out a raise without even thinking about it, because they said, we'll pay you $2.15 a week. And I was like, oh, okay. And I'd been taught to give it a minute. So I said, well, you know what? I'll get right back to you tomorrow. And by the next day, it was up to $2.25. And I hadn't even asked for a raise. So I got a job, and I came back. I came back to school, and I had 3 weeks left in college. And I was like, I have a job. and Kurt was like, why did they call you? And he was so upset. He got a job later. And wait, that's how I broke into comics. But while I was there, I learned that the way to make your own comics at DC was to work for years in the production department, and maybe someday you'd get a job doing little lettering corrections, and then maybe a couple of years later you might be able to ink some backgrounds, and maybe 20 years later you might be able to draw a book, things like that.
So climb slowly
Yeah,
up the ladder.
climb slowly up the ladder. And then my dad died. I was only 3 weeks into my job at DC, and my dad died, and something clicked inside me, and I decided, I don't want to wait. And so I started doing a proposal for a book of my own, and a year and a half into that job at DC, I did this comic Zod. And I should say my mom is right here in the front row as well. My mom is 92, living in Peabody, is here, and I just wanted to recognize her as well. Sitting next to my certified grade A actual muse, Ivy, who, as Hillary had said, inspired the character of Meg in this new book. So it's a real family affair. Oh, in fact, there's something important I should do before we go on. Just very quickly, I did want to give us just a quick notice of the fact that those of you, when you read the book, you're going to see a character that some have thought looks a little like Stan Lee. He's not actually. The character of Uncle Harry, who's an important pivotal character in this new book, was actually based on Ivy's dad, Lester Ratafia. Lester unfortunately passed away just, 5-6 days ago, only Friday, 4 days before this book was published. And I just want to also take a moment to remember him as well as my own father. Nobody could ever replace my own dad, but I think it's important to remember that Lester was my father-in-law for even longer than my original biological father was. So I just family seems to, swirl around my career. So I just figured I should mention that.
All right, so I won't ask you the Stan Lee question, which I had been planning on asking you.
A lot of people think he does look a bit like Stan Lee. We thought he was starting to look like Robert De Niro towards the end, although when we talked about the
That's a good look.
Yeah, right, exactly. When we said there might be a movie someday, he said, I think I should be played by that young guy. And we couldn't figure out who he meant until we realized he meant Tom Cruise.
Oh.
Yeah.
So, as was mentioned, you are one of the most important comics theorists today and media theorists, right? So understanding comics gets taught in all different departments, in all different disciplines. It's been hugely important, hugely influential, and you did reinventing comics, and you did making comics. So these really incredible works of comics theory that are in the form of comics themselves. So you did Zod. How did you decide, after doing these 3 books about comics, to do a certified capital G, capital N, almost 500-page graphic novel?
Oh, that sounded nice, that knocking. I like that knocking. Oh,
yes.
It's a beautiful sound.
It's a big book.
I felt I needed to in a lot of ways. I felt sometimes people would say, those who can't do, teach. And I know I'm supposed to ignore that comment, but at the same time, I always thought, that's kind of reasonable. Because I think if I had been a more natural artist, if drawing had come more naturally to me, I think I might have just stayed with it. If I could draw like Jaime Hernandez or Craig Thompson, I don't know that I would have been driven to try to understand and explain the medium. I wouldn't have necessarily been making books about how to make comics if I really felt I knew how to make comics. So that it kind of did drive me forward because I wasn't satisfied with my own skills as an artist or a writer. So, and I had this big hole in my resume. So yeah, I know I had a big target on my chest, right? It's like, hey, Mr. Understanding and Making Comics, you think you're such a big shot, wait till you have a book. But I thought, this is good, actually. And I hope any artists who are here, any writers or artists, I hope you get the experience of being able to work on something really big like that, really ambitious like that, where failure is not an option. Because that's a gift, I had to make this work. And I was very lucky to have an editor, Mark Siegel at First Second Books, who inspired me to make it work and who ensured that I had the space to do it. This is originally going to be a 3-year project. It turned to 5 because at one point he said, literally said, let's throw away the schedule. Let's get this right. Take as long as you need.
So what was the part that felt the longest for you in terms of the labor that went into it? Was it sketching out the plot? Was it actually doing the pages? Was it panelization? Where was that labor for you most concentrated?
The 2 hardest things were teaching myself how to draw, which I got started at with making comics in 2006. I say, go back and look at the beginning of making comics in the introduction. I say, I am partially teaching myself how to draw because I got this graphic novel that I need to do. And so this book is for me too. So I've described it as like I climbed up on my own shoulders and then pulled myself up. It makes no sense. So that was hard, just drawing, especially figure drawing, which I've never been great with. And I got live models to help me with this. And I did a lot of things. That was hard, the drawing part. But the really hard part, and the greatest challenge, but also the most exciting part, was learning to write. And I'd had some success with Zot, this thing that I did back in my 20s. I like Zot. I'm very fond of Zot. But it was
different because it was serial too, right? So
yes.
It was a different kind of pace.
Exactly, and it's exponentially more complex trying to create something of that size where all the parts reflect the whole. So this was a genuine writing challenge. And it took me a year to do the initial layouts of this 500-page book. And when I say layouts, they're very tight. They're very obsessive compulsive. You know, they're not too sketchy, actually. And after I was done, we did 4 more drafts over the coming year. So it was 2 years worth of that. And it was during those 2 years that I really learned how to write, how to structure a story in a serious way.
Now, I think you told me that you have some slides of your working process.
Oh yeah, I can
show
you. Yeah, I can show you what I mean. It's pretty crazy. This is sort of soup to nuts. It begins with, the ideas. This is like the little 3-ring binder that I had in high school where I would write down ideas. Most of them are not very good. Although I still want to do Thrombor the Human Super Ball someday. But somehow this idea of a superpowered sculptor got in there. But when I started to work on this in earnest several years ago, I took lots of notes. I was on a tour with my family to all 50 states to support this last book, Making Comics. And so all I could do was sit in the car and think about it, but that was good. A year's worth of just thinking about a story is tremendously valuable. Took lots of notes, and then I started to do the layouts once the whole thing got real, once we had a contract. And the thing about my layouts is, like I say, they're very tight. What you're looking at is a Photoshop document. This is all done digitally, 40 pages at a time. That's 40 pages, what you're looking at, 2 rows of 20 each. And the trick with this is that I have these spaces here, and I'm using them to organize the pages as I go. That's what any given panel looks like, okay? And the first time that line was written, it was written in the form of a word balloon, right? So if I want, I can take a panel out, and I can move it. Like I could take this panel here and just move it out, bring it up to that white space over there, and put it on a shelf, put other panels with it, and just like with word processing, you can let things reflow. I can reintroduce them later. Other panels can move to accommodate them. And the result of this working method is that I get this nice kind of forward momentum, this kind of flow, so I can concentrate on the way the story flows forward without getting too hung up on individual pages. But once that page is solid, once I like any given page, that's when it comes in first to Illustrator, where I do all of my word balloons and panel borders. And there's actually, you can find YouTube videos where I demonstrate how this is done. That's what you're looking at. And then those become sort of basically windows. This is a layered Photoshop document where the top layer is a window behind which the word balloons are sitting. So I can move that word balloon and it's still behind the panel. And then all the drawings are done behind the word balloon and the panels. It's a really natural way to work. And I have all these actions, that trigger multiple things all at once, one action after another with a touch of a button. And here I can use these side buttons on this Cintiq tablet that I draw on to just select brushes, change brushes.
Speed it up.
Yeah, this is actually speeded up. I wish I could draw that fast. Also, I should say I'm right-handed. This is flopped. And then, I work in layer after layer where that's the layout, right? And then I'll import these guidelines to do the perspective, and then just work layer after layer after layer until I have something that to me looks like a acceptable finished drawing. So I did that 500 pages worth of that nonsense.
Doesn't seem like nonsense to me. So I wanted to ask you if you felt, and you've talked about this, you've touched on this a little, if you felt nervous, right? So I was looking at some of the fantastic reviews that have come out in the past few days, and there was one from Wired magazine, and it has a headline something like, "The guy who teaches us all how to create comics finally does his own graphic novel." So especially because your books are so influential at breaking down formal principles of comics, were you thinking about all of those formal principles of panel-to-panel transitions and how a page works as you were doing it, and was it making you nervous?
Yeah, well, not so much nervous, but I will tell you that I didn't want any of them to be left on the surface. Mm-hmm. This was the challenge. I've been calling myself a formalist for years. I feel that I'm part of that tribe, just like my father, the engineer, the inventor. I like to analyze what I'm doing. I like to be able to articulate what I'm doing. And that's different. There are other artists who are much more intuitive. They want their art to be like they plunge their hands into their chest and pull out a flaming heart and throw it at the wall and, just make it all happen. I don't know how.
Sort of like David Smith, your protagonist.
Like David
Yes.
Smith. Yes, exactly. Yeah. But I knew that the ultimate goal, or not goal, but the ultimate kind of hitting the brass ring for a guy like me, for a formalist, is to impersonate his opposite number. That's what Art Spiegelman did with Mouse. A friend of ours, Kat Ironwood, my editor at the time, was visiting Art Spiegelman in his apartment, and she said, I like this. She was reading an early draft of Mouse, and she said, I like this little caption in the shape of a railway ticket. She thought that was clever. And Spiegelman said, I'll take it out. and she said, no, you misheard me. I said I liked it. And he said, yes, but you stopped reading. But this is the experimental artist, Art Spiegelman. What he was doing is he decided when he did Mouse to do the exact opposite of everything he had ever done. Because usually he wanted you to stop reading. He wanted you to stop reading every 10 seconds. Well, so do I sometimes, but not this time. This time, I wanted to take all of those techniques and theories and tools and analytical rubrics and whatnot and use them, but then bury them. And if I've done my job right when you pick up this book and start reading, it's going to suck you in, and by the third page, you're not going to know that you're looking at ink or color or paper or panels or transitions or anything. You're just going to see people, places, stories until you're done. I want it to be that opposite kind of an artist.
Well, I was hoping that we could look at a finished page together.
Sure, yeah.
How about page 68? So Scott is going to cue up the pages.
Let's see. This is the first time I've tried this. All right.
So this is an incredible scene at a party. The protagonist, David Smith, who's the sculptor, is at a crowded
Sorry, I'm trying this for the first time.
loft party. So you've always been so great at talking about time and space on the page and panelization, and I was wondering if you could just talk about what you were thinking about when you came up with the way this page is composed.
Sure. Yeah, one of the things, a funny thing about this book, for starters, is the fact that when you're looking through the book, it looks like, wow, Scott has the panels are big and small and jagged and they're all over the place. And then you look at the side of the book and you see these stripes and you really realize the entire book is on a grid. So if you look closely, you'll see that these tiny little...
Sorry to interrupt, but can you not touch the screen?
Oh, sorry. These tiny... I promise. I no more than 3 inches. The panels like this, these are just half of this grid, and the distance here is always the same, right? So it's very rigid, it's very structured, but hopefully it doesn't feel that way, because the way that these cascade down is very kind of non-standard. And in this case, what I'm doing is first of all, by going off the side of the page, I'm trying to create a sense of immersion, a sense that that you're surrounded by the action, you're embedded in the action, and the action is all around you. That gives you that sense of the way a party like just sort of extends out, and you have a sonic landscape, and you have a sensual landscape. You have that the smell of the drunk, the liquor,
The smell of the drunk
the
people.
smell of the drunk people, the sweat, the noise, all of it just overwhelming. And that's the whole point of the scene, is that he feels overwhelmed. And this is something I learned from manga, is if your protagonist feels something, the reader should feel that. So I was trying to get that across too. Also, something I learned from Kyle Baker, if you're at a party and you want it to feel loud and there's no sound, because there's never any sound in a printed comic, have everybody's mouths wide open like that. And they're like, even if they're saying, hey, how you doing? If they're saying it like this, and they're like right next to each other, it must be loud. And then there's also that sense of the tedium of the party, because the idea is my protagonist is stuck at this party he doesn't want to be at, and he's there for hours and hours and hours. So what do we have? We have repeating motifs. We have like the pouring of the cup, the drinking of the cup, the pouring of the cup. We see these same things over and over. Oh, by the way, oh my God, do you know what an American party is in Europe? My daughter was touring through Europe, and she told me this. What is an American party? Does anyone know?
I don't know.
Yes.
A party where they imitate Americans and they have red Solo cups and
Right. Red Solo cups and pizza. American party. So I love that they're red too. It's got to be red, not blue. So we have this. We have the repeating motif. But the idea of going off the side is very important. The use of bleeds. This is another reason why this is a printed book. You can get this in the. Well, I guess you can kind of get this in a mobile version. I didn't forbid them to do ebook versions, although I got my first 1-star review on Amazon.ca, the Canada one, because somebody hated the Kindle version. And I'm like, but that's not my fault. Stop. But there's a simultaneity here too. There's that sense that as you're looking at any one of these images, especially the silent images, the others persist, the others blend. And so there's that sense of that uncontrollable blending and cacophony. It's visual cacophony.
Right. So I wanted to ask you why sculpting. So for those of you who don't know what the plot of this book is, very briefly, it's a love story. It's also a story about the nature of art and what art is. And the protagonist has literally, in the story, made a deal with death. To be able to basically sculpt anything just by sheer force and the power of his imagination out of his hands. And I was wondering why sculpture? So, there have been some really interesting graphic novels recently, like David Mazzucchelli's book, Asterios Polyp, and it's about an architect, and they seem somehow related to the form of comics itself. Was sculpting at all for you related to comics or part of your interest in comics?
Actually, no. I think that comics and sculpture make a good dynamic combination, because you're struggling in flatland to evoke 3D space because it's kinetic. But I have to say that the choice of sculpture is one of the only things I didn't choose. I'm a very deliberate artist and a deliberate writer. But because this was something that existed in that old 3-ring binder from 30 years ago, it was the one thing I never considered.
You're very loyal to your past.
Well, it's not that. It's more like a jazz musician who decides, who spends 6 weeks working on a variation of, Old King Cole. Or Old King Cole is a song, not just a poem, right? Yeah, okay, I'm getting some nods. Anyway, like that, the only thing that they never really consider is the initial idea, because the initial idea was just the genesis, right? And everything is about how they build on the initial idea. It's stone soup, basically. The only thing I never decided on was the stone, because the stone was there when it began. So, and there's a few people have asked me that, and it's a fascinating question that I never even considered before. But after the fact, I think I lucked into something that works. It works in flatland, it works as a dramatic device, and also it works because my character, in defiance of all reason, is a stone sculptor, which is the dumbest thing to be in the 21st century. There's so many wonderful materials that you can work with, but to work with this stubborn, obsolete thing that really only evokes garden gnomes and tombstones is kind of nuts, but it has a permanence, and it has that evocation of of desperately craving something that stays.
Well, I was struck by the tactility that comes up so much throughout the book. And you know how haptic, obviously, a form sculpture is, and how haptic a form comics is. And there's this interesting theme where he sees his hands as actually separate from his person. Can we turn to one of those pages?
Oh,
I think
sure,
it's
yeah.
157.
Yeah, you bet.
So the character actually starts screaming eventually at his own hands, but his sort of rant against his hands starts on page
Yes, right here.
157.
Yeah, and you can see the progression as he is literally screaming his hands. In fact, here, can I read just a tiny bit?
I would love for you to read.
Yeah.
This is actually, I think, a quite funny part of a scene that turns grim.
This is where, I got tied. There we go. I came loose. Help.
Do you want me to read it?
Microphone wrangler. Maybe you'll have to. Wait, no, I think I got it. There we go. I see. I get it. Oh, now I know how these work. I learned something. Okay. All right, so first of all, you should know this guy's hungry. He hasn't slept in 3 days. He hasn't eaten in 3 days, maybe 4 or 5 days, actually. He's desperate. He's beginning to hallucinate. He's in very, very, very bad shape. So he's borderline delirious. Comes into this subway station because it was raining outside. He sits down on this bench, and then he just says, "Yeah, I know, you and me." Next panel, you'll see that guy is gone that was sitting next to him for reasons we can infer. It says, "Remember 10th grade when, is it better here? Wait. Oh, wait, I have a book. Oh, my God, here it is." All right.
157.
157, thank you. Like I couldn't remember that, yeah. I actually forgot. Okay.
Speaking of tactility.
I know. Here we go, almost there. 157. Print. Here we go. Yes, all right. Remember 10th grade, how Haley Robbins wanted a portrait of Chad from Nickelback? God, we hated those guys. But you drew it. You took one for the team. And I got kissed under the stairs while you slipped inside that sweater. But then we grew older. And you... Like the beats in conversations are really important. That's something that comes with length. Is you don't have to have a word balloon in every single panel. You abandoned me, just like everybody else. You took everything I had and then forgot about me, as if I was already dead. As if I was never here at all. I'm gone, and you don't even care. And then I get to draw a panel I really like. I don't know why. I just really like that panel on top, and you can sort of see what happens from there. But, yeah, I don't know. I was thinking of Koyaanisqatsi. Has anyone seen Koyaanisqatsi? There's some amazing scenes where people are just standing and facing you, and behind them there's these onrushing trains, these trains rushing by. I don't know. That stuck in my head. So I really like that static image with the... It's also true in manga, actually, with manga motion does that.
There are a lot of panels in the book, actually, that feature hands. A lot of panels of him making sculptures, a lot of panels just of hands like this, and hands...
And hidden hands.
Hidden hands.
There are hidden hands. Do you know where he's from? He's from Lansing. He mentions this. He has a storage unit back in Lansing. I'm going to be giving a talk or not talk, but, a conversation in Lansing. Why is he from Lansing? Anyone? Michigan. And why Michigan? Right? Also, I like that he's from Michigan because what a lot of us, when we think of Michigan, we think, yeah, Michigan, where they used to make things. And something about that just feels achingly appropriate.
Well, let me ask you then about different types of making things in the book, because one of the things that struck me reading this book is how it's about all sorts of different kinds of art and contemporary art.
Yeah.
So much more than any of your other work that I've read, it's really about the contemporary art scene. So it's about galleries, it's about museums, but it's also about this incredible kind of public art, right? Including the public art that the character Meg is involved in, which is basically like street performance art. So could we turn to the page, it's 48 to 49?
Sure.
Where a large group of people is involved in doing a public performance involving the protagonist, and he doesn't know he's part of this public art performance.
Yeah, he's just caught in this web of people. Yeah.
So how did you decide to do a book that was so immersed in the contemporary art world and different kinds of art making?
Well, to me, I was really fascinated by movements like improv everywhere, which were a little newer when I started this. You know, this one of the problems is you start the book and 6 years later you're still working on it and things have come and gone. Like the Pope I have a reference to. Somebody must have said something in Rome and it's like, now that means something completely different. But I was fascinated by that, by using human beings as a form, and also the way that it redefines performance and redefines the artistic process to use people in that way, in the way that improv everywhere does. And it also, I'm fascinated by the human landscape as distinct from the interior landscape and the aesthetic landscape of the things that he wants to make. In a lot of ways, what he wants to make and what he wants to participate in is kind of either agnostic about or even separate from the human world. And it's this notion of, this comes up again, you'll see this motif of the crowd ring, something you'll see in New York if there's an accident or a disturbance, you'll see this crowd ring begin to appear. That you find a few of those little ripples in the book. But it's that idea of using people to make art, not just making art out of things. David is all about things, and there are a lot of discussions of like people as things to him, whereas there's a different worldview for the woman he loves.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things that happens in the book, again, for those of you who don't know the plot structure, is he becomes a sort of public art vigilante. And I was wondering if we could just turn to one of the pages that shows his art, maybe 323.
Sure.
And so you can see over there that because he has this power, he can sculpt something out of a street light. He can make something like down below that's part of a building, and he becomes this vigilante, sort of a criminal, but this incredible public artist.
Yeah.
And that's something he actually shares with Meg, who's involved in these public performances.
Yeah.
Was there something about public art specifically that interested you, even if it's making things the way he makes?
I saw it as an opportunity to have this kind of like, you have this bottled up character who is in the dark, who wants to be in the sunlight. And this is a way for him to break into the sunlight. And I liked it because it had that slingshot effect. He's literally working in a closet at a certain point in the story. That's the only workspace that he has, is this big oversized broom closet that he's stuck into. So there's that sense of confinement. All that energy is being packed in and packed in and packed in, which for me is similar to the way I think many artists in this world are. We have this feeling that for all of the artists out there, most artists who are working in relative obscurity, working in the small spaces of their own head, working in tiny little rooms, and without an audience or with very little audience, they're compacted, they're pressed down, they're like this volcano in a shoebox. And the process of breaking out into public view is for me an exciting externalization of that idea of breaking out, of being seen, of demanding to be seen. Mm-hmm. But one of the things, of course, that proceeds from that is that the desire itself becomes the point, and once he's seen, it's almost like he's left unsure of why he wanted to be seen in the first place. The actual artistic intent, the artistic intent or philosophy behind it seems absent, seems shallow. He doesn't really even know why. All he knows is he craves the sunlight. Mm-hmm. He craves being public. He craves being the object of other people's attention.
So I'll just ask you one more question, and then for time's sake, we should open it out to the audience.
Sure.
But I was wondering, because this book is in so many fascinating ways about different kinds of art in museums, in galleries, on the street, attached to buildings, how you think comics fits in, if at all, to a contemporary art landscape?
Well, comics fits in with the contemporary art landscape in a lot of ways. Sorry, my mic is malfunctioning a little. Let me get that. In a lot of ways, but I think probably the most constructive way now is that it is doing so on its own terms. I always remember how Spiegelman's mouse was exhibited once. I think I saw it at the Hirshhorn in Washington, D.C., maybe. I think it originally been at MoMA in New York. But what was beautiful is it was just comics pages with all the notes and things on the vertical and the comics pages on the horizontal, but they were eye level. And so you see all of these nice little old ladies going on Sunday to the museum, you know, just like dutifully reading Art Spiegelman's guide. This is the guy who created the Garbage Pail Kids, or worked on it anyway. And here they are reading, reverently reading and walking across them. That to me says that yes, we are recognizing this as art, but we're also recognizing it as art within that context. Now there are other artists who are different, artists like Pettibone or Basquiat, who had a comics-like sensibility, but they were actually actively engaging in the art scene as it was. But I have to say, ultimately, this book is less about the art scene per se, and I think it's more about my outsider protagonist, this character who so desperately wants to be a part of it. It's in many ways about the desire, the need, the craving for attention. And in the end, I think even to me, even after sort of studying this for a while, I think the scene itself, to some extent, is inscrutable. He never really breaks through. In fact, the only work he ever does that's of interest to the art scene, we never actually see. Mm-hmm. You know, we know he's done some work that worked in galleries that got people's attention. That's the stuff we don't see because I know I'm not good enough. And like my protagonist, no, seriously, I'm not good enough to make that stuff convincingly. And like my protagonist also, I have what Leonard Bernstein's kids called an irony deficiency. And so I'm a little too earnest, I think, to pull it off.
Well, on that note, why don't we open it up for questions from the
Sure.
audience? Yes.
You spoke a lot about manga in this talk. I'm just wondering, are there series or authors that you would recommend? I'm a big fan myself, so I wanted to get your take on the genre.
Well, I'm going to sound like an old man if I mention Tezuka, because he's sort of the big bang going back. Yeah, I know. How could you not? Exactly. He's the trunk of the tree. My interest in manga had a lot to do with sort of the evolution of manga over time, but I have been so busy these last 10 years that I don't consider myself up on as much on what's happening. And there's just recently some people have been recommending series to me that sound fantastic that I want to check out. But my reading, I was way behind on my reading. And, but I got the opportunity. I got this huge pile of comics I had to read for an anthology to really catch up on what was going on in comics.
The Best American Comics?
Best American Comics, but you'll notice that word, American. So unfortunately, they were all American comics. So I still have a lot of catching up to do. But manga, this is a very international book, by the way. This particular book is very much trying to capture the world building of European comics, the sense of participation of Japanese comics, and it even has a bit of that DNA of the good old American power fantasy. And so it's a very international flavor, I think.
Yes.
I was wondering if you could at all speak to the role of critique in your work, and who are the people around you that you trust to give you that critique?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. For years, ever since my very first comic, I was very suspicious of my own critical faculties where my work was concerned. And so I was literally paying friends. Even at the age of 24, I was giving them paying them money to tell me my work sucked. Right? You know, like here, have $100. Now you have to be ruthless. Kurt Busiek, my old friend, who, as I said, also went into comics, he was more than happy to be ruthless. It's his nature. So he was a fantastic critic. I got others like Neil Gaiman, Steve Bissett, my friend Jen Manley Lee, Ivy. They all, Larry Martyr, they all came in and basically told me where, you know, what I was doing wrong. In Understanding Comics, I did the layout version of Understanding Comics, and they convinced me to kill an entire chapter that just wasn't working and to add a new chapter, and I did. Same with this book. A lot of those same people, a slightly different cast of characters. Vera Brosgol and James Sturm joined the group. Neil was busy. I don't want to bother him. But I did the same thing, and that's another reason I did 4 drafts was I got them to ruthlessly critique what I was doing. But in the end, my editor, Mark Siegel, was so good at it that I let him do the last 2 drafts alone.
And you weren't paying him.
Yeah, I know. He was technically kind of paying me.
Right.
No, the people who were paying me were paying him also.
Okay.
Yeah.
You turned that one around.
Yeah, I know. What a deal.
Yes.
You're so well known for understanding comics and, of course, Zod. But I'm also a big fan of your short run on Superman Adventures.
Oh, thank you.
Can you talk a little bit about the development of what it's like working on an independently created thing versus a corporate-owned character like Superman?
I think the important thing in working in comics created by others or owned by others, like mainstream characters like Superman, you got to let it go. It's a temperament thing. Yeah, I'm incredibly meticulous, and I'm insufferable when I'm working on my own stuff. I mean, everything has to be exactly so. I'm very demanding. I'm a real perfectionist. I mean, even as we speak, I feel like taking out a little black Sharpie and going, oh, that line needs to be a little darker. You know, I'm still working on this in my head. But when it comes to writing that Superman story, this was, Superman Adventures was sort of geared towards the kids market. It was based on the cartoon. Once I was done with the script, I could let it go. One of the things, I did these little thumbnails where I said, hey, I'm an artist. You know what? I wrote you this script, and I kind of think the panels could fit together like this. But go to town. And I would give it to the artist, and if the artist wanted to change it, I was fine with that. Because I knew this was a chance for me to exercise my craft, but this was not a chance for me to control the work. And it was good. It was a good feeling to improve as a writer in isolation, you know, of all of those other things, and to be able to just wash my hands of it and just say, it's okay. It's okay, Scott. You cannot make it perfect. Somebody else is doing it now. And that was good. The other good thing about Superman Adventures in particular was that Paul Dini had just done the Bible for this cartoon. It was Paul Dini and Bruce Timm, they had worked on the Batman cartoon show, which I thought was absolutely fantastic. And they said, hey, we're going to do Superman now. You know, when they approached me, basically they said, hey, we're restarting the character of Superman as a cartoon. It's kind of simple, kind of streamlined. We've created some new characters for it. And we have done one comic book, issue number 1. How do you like to take over with issue number 2? This character called Superman, who's brand new and nobody's ever done anything with him before. And I said, yes, I would like to do that very much. And I liked working on that. I did 12 issues, and some of them I'm actually quite proud of, especially the one where time is running backwards, because I got to just be a writer and relax and let it go at the end of the day. It was good. Yeah.
Yes.
I'm curious as to the selection of the name David Smith for your Sculptor.
Mhm.
Sculptor. I haven't read your book yet, but I will. Yes. My favorite sculptor is David Smith.
One of mine, too.
Comes up in the book.
I can promise you it's not just an homage. He is tortured, just frustrated. He is aggravated at always having to be the other David Smith. That is his curse in life, is no matter how much respect he can manage to scrape for himself as a sculptor, even if he claws his way to the middle, he's always going to be the other David Smith. And this proved a really useful dramatic device, but for me it also called up some of the deeper themes of the story, and how in a way that endless phone book of David Smiths, because there are other David Smiths who show up. I mean, it's a common name, right? So he will bump into other David Smiths as the story goes on, but that's a way of saying that this is a story about all the other names in the phone book. There are so many stories about the famous ones. There are so many stories about the ones who succeed, who manage to last forever, who, you know, paint a ceiling in a chapel or lop their earlobe off or whatever, and for one reason or another are exalted for all time. But what about all the people who labor in obscurity for 20 or 30 years and are forgotten, sometimes forgotten in their own lives? Those are the other David Smiths, and that's what this story in large part is about, is kind of a love letter to the forgotten. Because in a way, we're all going down that same ramp, even if it takes some of us a little longer to be forgotten. It is going to happen to all of us. And so I thought that was a story worth telling. Thank you.
Yes.
I'm reading the Best American Comics volume that you edited, and I understand how, reading about it, how the selections were made from that. And it sounds like a tremendous amount of work. You referenced this huge stack of the strips you had to read for that. I'm just curious how you fit that in and how that influenced what you're doing. Like, did you use that as a break from this, and did they go together? I mean, how, to do two such big things at the same time seems...
Well, I carefully planned it so that I could be working on Best American Comics when I was completely done with the Sculptor and all the files had been sent off and the colors chosen and we'd done all corrections. And also when I would be in Tennessee and relaxing and teaching this class that I did for 2.5 months. So everything was very carefully timed. Didn't work. The book went long, and so I got to finish the Sculptor. Like really do all these corrections, rewriting the first 50 pages, redrawing the first 50 pages, while selecting from the thousands and thousands of comics I'd been sent by my good pal Bill Cardilopoulos, series editor of Best American Comics, while teaching the class in Tennessee, while also going to Amsterdam and Orlando and Atlanta and a Houston Art Museum and a talk at Google and a talk at Bloomberg, and it was really incredibly crazy. But I somehow got it all done. I don't know how. Sometimes it's nice to have too much work. I'd rather have that than the reverse. Somehow it's, well, yeah, Ivy, did I leave something out that we had to do?
I was going to say, I know how you got it done.
Because you were there?
13 hours a day,
oh, yes.
7 days a week.
13 hours a day, 7 days a week. I guess that's the key. I was basically working 3 jobs, like so many in America today. Yeah, it was really hard. I remember Jeff Smith, who edited it before me, saying, "Wow, this is so much harder than I thought it would be." And I remember reading that and thinking, "Uh-oh." It really was. It was really hard. And I made it harder, too, because that's just what I do. I gave myself extra assignments. How about if I write 10 introductions instead of 1? Okay, Scott. I will say, for anyone who's only seen the table of contents, a lot of people complain, why are there no superheroes in Best American Comics? Because we chose one, and in the end, because of rights issues, we couldn't include it, and that was Hawkeye. So, just saying, that would also be part of it. So I went all the way from Hawkeye to Lael Westfind and Sam Alden. It had a lot of range to it.
Yes.
I used your texts to teach fifth graders how to write comics, and last year was our first foray into it, and 10-year-olds were thinking that writing comics would just be such a relief compared to writing expository text and narrative and memoir and all this other stuff that they have to write. And they thought that writing comics would be diving into panels, and that's what they were really, really craving was, great, just give us the panels, we're ready to do it. And they ran into roadblock after roadblock after roadblock. Could you talk a little bit about your writing process and that tension between wanting to express and plan visually and wanting to express and plan in a narrative structure?
Well, I think, and just first of all, in terms of general story structure, I found it useful to think of stories, just generally speaking, as, well, to pay special attention to the notion of desire, not as an important ingredient of story, but as the very substance of story. I think that it's helpful to look at stories as the life cycle of a desire. You're going to find that many stories really come into being, they gestate as the gestation of a desire, and when that desire comes to rest, usually the story is over. It may come to rest when it's denied or achieved or transformed. Usually, it at best transformed in some way. And it's also, I think, some of the most interesting stories are ones in which both the protagonist and the reader are encouraged to interrogate that desire, to interrogate its worth or its source, or to better understand where that desire leads or where it originates from. And when teaching, especially younger students, I find it's really terrific to just tell them, look, everybody has to want something. What I just said, that's all I said, right? Everybody has to want something. That's one of the things Kurt Vonnegut says. Every character should want something, even if it's a glass of water. When we teach kids that stories need conflict, well, desire is the origin of conflict. So just getting that is a real, it's such a gift to break roadblocks. Even if that as a perfect, summation of story is somehow lacking, even if that leaves out a lot, even if it's somehow faulty. It's still a really good trick to make yourself right. You know, just ask what the character wants, and everything else just answers itself. It's magnificent. Also, it's really good for writing very small stories. And aspiring writers, especially young aspiring writers, really have to put away this 9,000-page intergalactic space epic with the vampires and just try something that's like 1 or 2 pages long. And the best way to do that is to understand that, yes, you can have a small desire. You can just have somebody who wants to go to the bathroom but can't find one in New York City. That's a perfectly valid 2-page comic. I've seen it. It was great. You know, it doesn't have to be something huge. That's only a piece of it was a big question, actually, now that I think about it. That's just a piece of the answer, but that's one aspect that I found useful in teaching students.
In the balcony.
But now I have to ask.
Will you repeat the question, so in case people didn't hear down
Actually,
here?
and I also need a little clarification. Are we referring to the role of music in the creation of the work, or the role of music within the story? I'm not sure exactly what you mean.
Well, I guess
The representation of music, yeah, in a soundless environment. Actually, oh, can I show you something? This is cool. I really like this one. I'm secretly proud of this. That party scene.
Not so secret anymore.
Not so secret. Nope, not so secret. We mentioned that party scene earlier, and there's this thing I did where we have this establishing shot. This is very manga too. This is on page, let's see, it would be 66. So hold on. Yeah, but I'm sorry. This is I should never switch apps. That's not cool. Scott, you're switching apps. God, that's so 1996. Okay. All right, look at this. Check this out. This is so awesome. I got to. Do you see the wumpa wumpa wumpa, thampa thampa thampa? Dude, that's what happens when like the music is inside but you're outside, right? If you're like outside a building and there's really loud music and it's like house music or something, it's going to be going wumpa 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 until you walk through the door and then it's thampa 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 thampa. It totally works. And also the wumpa is like white on black, and then the thampa is black on white. But notice how it goes off the edge of the panel like that? That's very important because now you have that sense that, again, it extends, it bleeds into the whole scene, and so it has this persistence of presence as you're reading. Yeah, there's so many different ways to do a lot of, manga does it real well. Scott Pilgrim was fantastic for that. I love the way Brian Lee O'Malley would represent music. It's partially inspired by manga, but just partially because he's awesome. Like or like when somebody's singing and you want it, or like Raina Telgemeier in her comic Drama when she has her character prove that she's a terrible singer. Like just the challenge of drawing notes with the squiggles and the jags just to show, that's awful. Yeah.
Was there another hand in the balcony? I didn't want to skip out there.
You've now made mention of 9,000 pages.
Can you speak up?
Yes. So you've now made mention of 9,000 page space epics with vampires.
You're working one, aren't you?
And Brian Lee O'Malley. And that sort of helps me segue into a question that I was going to ask anyway. What is Homestuck? Is it a comic?
What is Costa?
Homestuck.
Oh, Homestuck. Is Homestuck a comic? Yeah, both. Actually, I mentioned that in Best American Comics, since I'm only talking about American web comics, I'm sort of talking about a few cutting-edge comics, but also talking about general trends. I mentioned XKCD, Homestuck, and Hyperbole and a Half. And at one point, I have to admit, you might almost say that 2 out of 3 of these aren't comics by McCloudian definition. And then I'm like, So that's like, people forget. That whole thing about McCloud wants to define comics.
People forget you wrote it in 1993.
Not only in 1993, but that was only one chapter. I just thought, yeah, I only wrote that chapter because I thought, comics, they have staples and superheroes and funny animals. The end. What else is there to talk about? And I just thought, no, wait, I mean, they could, oh. You know, so there was this consensus of definition, and I felt, could we just erase the blackboard, start over for a minute? And I thought, hey, look, if comics are this, look how much bigger the territory is, and look how many cool things come in. And now it's time to move to chapter 2. And somehow, some people think I never move beyond chapter 2, and I'm like, you're not a comic. You know, it's like, hyperbole and a half is really cool. Is it a comic? Sometimes. Okay.
Okay, we have time for one more question. Yes.
We're all just mad for what you did to poor Bill Keane.
That is true, yeah. He is. You don't want to piss off the family circus people.
A lot of what you're famous for is your deep thinking and passion for digital interactive comics. So I was a little surprised to hear you wash your hands of the Kindle edition of the Sculptor. Did you ever consider doing a more digital native?
Oh, I'm not washing my hands of the Kindle edition of the Sculptor because it's a digital edition. I'm washing my hands of it because apparently it's bad. I haven't actually seen the Kindle edition. All I know is that it gave me my only 1-star review on Amazon.ca, and I'm pissed off. Because that book's, it's like 47 now. I mean, like in the world, or no, in Canada. It's like, so it's like, hey, look, my book is selling in Canada, and it's like 1 star. And I'm like, hey, that isn't even because of the quality. Oh, the Kindle edition. I'm sorry. You can tell it's towards the end of the evening. Scott's getting a little... he's kind of getting a little crazy up there. No, the thing is, and I explain this in my blog. Look for a blog entry on just the front page of scottmccloud.com. You'll find a blog entry called Design for the Device. I have never lost my zeal for and love for the possibilities of designing for digital spaces. That hasn't changed at all. But part of that is because I believe that when you choose to design for a particular environment like digital, you have to push the possibilities of that art form, of that work, all the way to the edge of the envelope. You have to fill out and show the shape of those possibilities by finding every corner, by pushing right to the edge. And that means if you're working digitally, you should be incorporating whatever works for your story, even if the thing is, laid out in 1,000 panels on a giant, infinite canvas or in a big scroll, or something like Homestuck that's using a lot of the other sorts of possibilities, limited animation or interactivity, whatever it is. That's pushing the limits of that. But this is a device too. And this time I designed for this device. And I never for a moment thought about what, repurposing might happen on an iPad or a Kindle. I knew that those would exist, partially because I'm deeply grateful to my publisher for, paying me enough to sit on my ass for 5 years and draw the thing. But, and I want them to recoup whatever they can. So it's okay if those exist. But for me, this is the version. This is the real version. And I've done everything I can to push the limits of what we can do in this space, with this device, within the parameters of this gorgeous 500-year-old technology.
Knock on it.
Knock on it. This is the device, and I've designed for it. This is all that matters to me for this one.
Okay, we're out of time. On that note, let's have a round of applause for Scott.
When Kim Jong-il wanted everybody to speak the language the same way, and in Salt, Shin made a point of having everybody speak in their own dialects as opposed to the same communal language. Pulgasari is about a monster that the peasants create to attack the evil, profit-hungry landlords, which is all propaganda, but in the end the monster becomes too powerful and turns on the people, which is a fairly good metaphor for the Kims.